Sir David Paradine Frost, OB. He was an English journalist, comedian, writer, media personality and television host. After graduating from Gonville and Caius College, Cambridge, Frost rose to prominence in the UK when he was chosen to host the satirical programme That Was the Week That Was in 1962. His success on this show led to work as a host on US television. He became known for his television interviews with senior political figures, among them the Nixon Interviews with former United States President Richard Nixon in 1977, which were adapted into a stage play and film. Frost was one of the famous five, who were behind the launch of ITV breakfast station TVM in 1983. For the BBC, he hosted the Sunday morning interview programme Breakfast with Frost from 1993 to 2005. He spent 2 decades as host of Through the Keyhole. From 2006 to 2012 he hosted the weekly programme Frost Over the World on Al Jazeera English, and from 2012, the weekly programme The Frost Interview. Frost died on August 31, 2013, aged 74, on board the cruise ship Miss Queen Elizabeth, on which he had been engaged as a speaker. Early life: David Paradine Frost was born in Tenterden, Kent, on April 7, 1939, the son of a Methodist minister of Huguenot descent, the Reverend Wilfred John W.J. Paradine Frost, and his wife, Mona. He had 2 elder sisters. While living in Gillingham, Kent, he was taught in the Bible class of the Sunday school at his father's church by David Gilmore Harvey, and subsequently started training as a Methodist local preacher, which he did not complete. Frost attended Barnsole Road Primary School in Gillingham, then Gillingham Grammar School, and finally while residing in Raunds Wellingborough Grammar School. Throughout his school years he was an avid football and cricket player, and was offered a contract with Nottingham Forest FC. For 2 years before going to university he was a lay preacher following his witnessing of an event presided over by the Christian evangelist Billy Graham. Frost studied at Gonville and Caius College, Cambridge University, from 1958, graduating from the university with a 3rd in English. He was editor of both the university's student paper, Varsity, and the literary magazine Granta. He was also secretary of the Footlights Drama Society, which included actors such as Peter Cook and John Bird. During this period, Frost appeared on television for the first time in an edition of Anglia Television's Town and Gown, performing several comic characters. "The first time I stepped into a television studio he once remembered, it felt like home. It didn't unregistered trademark scare me. Talking to the camera seemed the most natural thing in the world according to some accounts. Frost was the victim of snobbery from the group with which he associated at Cambridge, which has been confirmed by Barry Humphries. Christopher Booker, while asserting that Frost's one defining characteristic was ambition, commented that he was impossible to dislike. According to the satirist John Wells, the old Etonian actor Jonathan Cecil congratulated Frost around this time for that wonderfully silly voice he used while performing, but then discovered that it was Frost's real voice. After leaving university, Frost became a trainee at Associated Rediffusion. Meanwhile, having already gained an agent, Frost performed in cabaret at the Blue Angel nightclub in Berkeley Square, London during the evenings. That Was the Week That Was. Frost was chosen by writer and producer Ned Sherrin to host the satirical programme That Was the Week That Was, alias TW3, after Frost's flatmate John Bird suggested Sherrin should see his act at the Blue Angel. The series, which ran for less than 18 months during 1962-63, was part of the satire boom in early 1960s Britain and became a popular programme. The involvement of Frost in TW3 led to an intensification of the rivalry with Peter Cook, who accused him of stealing material and dubbed Frost the bubonic plagiarist. The new satirical magazine Private Eye also mocked him at this time. Frost visited the United States during the break between the 2 series of TW3 in the summer of 1963 and stayed with the producer of the New York production of Beyond the Fringe. Frost was unable to swim, but still jumped into the pool, and nearly drowned until he was saved by Peter Cook. At the memorial service for Cook in 1995, Alan Bennett recalled that rescuing Frost was the one regret Cook frequently expressed. For the first 3 editions of the second series in 1963, the BBC attempted to limit the team by scheduling repeats of the Third Man television series after the programme, thus preventing overruns. Frost took to reading synopses of the episodes at the end of the programme as a means of sabotage. After the BBC's Director-General Hugh Green instructed that the repeats should be abandoned, TW3 returned to being open-ended. More somberly, on November 23, 1963, a tribute to the assassinated President John F. Kennedy, an event which had occurred the previous day, formed an entire edition of That Was the Week That Was. An American version of TW3 ran after the original British series had ended. Following a pilot episode on November 10, 1963, the 30-minute US series, also featuring Frost, ran on NBC from January 10, 1964 to May 1965. In 1985, Frost produced and hosted a television special in the same format, That Was the Year That Was, on NBC. Post-TW3, Frost fronted various programs following the success of TW3, including its immediate successor, Not So Much a Program, More a Way of Life, which he co-chaired with Willie Rushton and poet P.J. Kavanagh. Screened on 3 evenings each week, this series was dropped after a sketch was found to be offensive to Catholics and another to the British royal family. More successful was The Frost Report, broadcast between 1966 and 1967. The show launched the television careers of John Cleese, Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett, who appeared together in the class sketch. Frost signed for Rediffusion, the ITV weekday contractor in London, to produce a heavier interview-based show called The Frost Programme. Guests included Sir Oswald Mosley and Rhodesian Premier Ian Smith. His memorable dressing down of insurance fraudster Emile Savundra, regarded as the first example of trial by television in the UK, led to concern from ITV executives that it might affect Savundra's right to a fair trial. Frost's introductory words for his television programmes during this period, "Hello, good evening and welcome," became his catchphrase and were often mimicked. Frost was a member of a successful consortium, including former executives from the BBC, which bid for an ITV franchise in 1967. This became London Weekend Television, which began broadcasting in July 1968. The station began with a programming policy which was considered highbrow and suffered launch problems with low audience ratings and financial problems. A September 1968 meeting of the Network Programme Committee, which made decisions about the channel's scheduling, was particularly fraught, with Lou Grade expressing hatred of Frost in his presence. Frost, according to Kitty Muggeridge in 1967, had risen without a trace. He was involved in the station's early years as a presenter. On 20th and 21st July 1969, during the British television Apollo 11 coverage, he presented David Frost's Moon Party for LWT, a 10-hour discussion and entertainment marathon from LWT's Wembley studios, on the night Neil Armstrong walked on the Moon. 2 of his guests on this programme were British historian A.J.P. Taylor and entertainer Sammy Davis, Jr. Around this time Frost interviewed Rupert Murdoch, whose recently acquired Sunday tabloid, The News of the World, had just serialised the memoirs of Christine Keeler, a central figure in the Profumo scandal of 1963. For the Australian publisher, this was a bruising encounter, although Frost said that he had not intended it to be. Murdoch confessed to his biographer Michael Wolff that the incident had convinced him that Frost was an arrogant bastard, and a bloody bugger. In the late 1960s he began an intermittent involvement in the film industry. Setting up David Paradine Limited in 1966, he part-financed The Rise and Rise of Michael Rimmer, in which the lead character was based partly on Frost, and gained an executive producer credit. In 1976 Frost was the executive producer of the British musical film The Slipper and the Rose, retelling the story of Cinderella. Frost was the subject of This Is Your Life in January 1972 when he was surprised by Eamon Andrews at London's Quiglino's restaurant. American career from 1968 to 1980. In 1968 he signed a contract worth £125,000 to appear on American television in his own show on 3 evenings each week, the largest such arrangement for a British television personality at the time. From 1969 to 1972, Frost kept his London shows and fronted the David Frost Show on the Group W television stations in the United States. His 1970 TV special, Frost on America, featured guests such as Jack Benny and Tennessee Williams. In a declassified transcript of a 1972 telephone call between Frost and Henry Kissinger, President Nixon's national security advisor and Secretary of State, Frost urged Kissinger to call chess grandmaster Bobby Fischer and urge him to compete in that year's World Chess Championship. During this call, Frost revealed that he was working on a novel. Frost interviewed heavyweight boxer Muhammad Ali at his training camp in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania in 1974, prior to the Rumble in the Jungle with George Foreman. During the interview, Ali remarked, "Listen David, when I meet this man, if you think the world was surprised when Nixon resigned, wait till I whip 4 unregistered trademark S behind." In 1977 the Nixon Interviews, a series of 5 90-minute interviews with former U.S. President Richard Nixon, were broadcast. Nixon was paid $600,000 plus a share of the profits for the interviews, which had to be funded by Frost himself after the U.S. television networks turned down the program, describing it as checkbook journalism. Frost's company negotiated its own deals to syndicate the interviews with local stations across the U.S. and internationally, creating what Ron Howard described as the first fourth network. Frost taped around 29 hours of interviews with Nixon over a period of 4 weeks. Nixon, who had previously avoided discussing his role in the Watergate scandal which had led to his resignation as president in 1974, expressed contrition saying, "I let the American people down and I have to carry that burden with me for the rest of my life." Following the 1979 Iranian Revolution, Frost was the last person to interview Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the deposed Shah of Iran. The interview took place in Panama in January 1980, and was broadcast by ABC in the United States on January 17. Frost was an organizer of the Music for UNICEF concert at the United Nations General Assembly in 1979. 10 years later, he was hired as the anchor of the new American tabloid news program Inside Edition. He was dismissed after only 3 weeks, and then ABC News reporter Bill O'Reilly was recruited as his replacement. After 1980, Frost was one of the famous 5, who launched TVM in February 1983 but, like LWT in the late 1960s, the station began with an unsustainable highbrow approach. Frost remained a presenter after restructuring. Frost on Sunday began in September 1983 and continued until the station lost its franchise at the end of 1992. Frost had been part of an unsuccessful consortium, CPV-TV, with Richard Branson and other interests, which had attempted to acquire 3 ITV contractor franchises prior to the changes made by the Independent Television Commission in 1991. After transferring from ITV, his Sunday morning interview program Breakfast with Frost ran on the BBC from January 1993 until May 29, 2005. For a time it ran on BSB before moving to BBC One. Frost hosted Through the Keyhole, which ran on several UK channels from 1987 until 2008 and also featured Lloyd Grossman. Produced by his own production company, the program was first shown in prime time and on daytime television in its later years. Frost worked for Al Jazeera English, presenting a live weekly hour-long current affairs program, Frost Over the World, which started when the network launched in November 2006. The program regularly made headlines with interviewees such as Tony Blair, President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, Benazir Bhutto and President Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua. The program was produced by the former Question Time editor and Independent on Sunday journalist Charlie Courtauld. Frost was one of the first to interview the man who authored the Fatwa on Terrorism, Muhammad Tayyar al-Qadri. During his career as a broadcaster, Frost became one of Concorde's most frequent flyers, having flown between London and New York an average of 20 times per year for 20 years. In 2007, Frost hosted a discussion with Libya's leader Muammar Gaddafi as part of the Monitor Group's involvement in the country. In June 2010, Frost presented Frost on Satire, an hour-long BBC4 documentary looking at the history of television satire. Achievements. Frost was the only person to have interviewed all 8 British Prime Ministers serving between 1964 and 2014 and all 7 US Presidents in office between 1969 and 2008. He was a patron and former Vice President of the Motor Neuron Disease Association charity, as well as being a patron of the Alzheimer's Research Trust, Hearing Star Benevolent Fund, East Anglia's Children's Hospices, the Home Farm Trust and the Elton John AIDS Foundation. After having been in television for 40 years, Frost was estimated to be worth £200 million by the Sunday Times Rich List in 2006, a figure he considered a significant overestimate in 2011. The valuation included the assets of his main British company and subsidiaries, plus homes in London and the country. Frost-Nixon. Frost-Nixon was originally a play written by Peter Morgan, developed from the Nixon interviews which Frost had conducted with Richard Nixon in 1977. Frost-Nixon was presented as a stage production in London in 2006, and on Broadway in 2007. The play was adapted into a Hollywood motion picture starring Michael Sheen as Frost and Frank Langella as Nixon, both reprising their stage roles. The film was directed by Ron Howard and released in 2008. It was nominated for 5 Golden Globe Awards, Best Motion Picture Drama, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Screenplay and Best Original Score, and for 5 Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Editing. In February 2009, Frost was featured on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's International Affairs Programme Foreign Correspondent in a report titled The World According to Frost, reflecting on his long career and portrayal in the film Frost-Nixon. Personal life. Frost was known for several relationships with high-profile women. In the mid-1960s, he dated British actress Jeanette Scott, between her marriages to songwriter Jackie Ray and singer Mel Torme. Copyright. In the early 1970s he was engaged to American actress Diahann Carroll. Between 1972 and 1977 he had a relationship with British socialite Caroline Cushing. In 1981 he married Lynn Frederick, widow of Peter Sellers, but they divorced the following year. He also had an 18-year intermittent affair with American actress Carol Linley. On March 19, 1983, Frost married Lady Corina Fitzalan Howard, daughter of the 17th Duke of Norfolk. Over the next 5 years, they had 3 sons, Miles, Wilfred and George, and for many years lived in Chelsea, with their weekend home at Michaelmarsh Court in Hampshire. Death. On August 31, 2013, Frost was aboard a Cunard Line cruise ship, the Miss Queen Elizabeth, when he had a heart attack and died. Cunard said that the vessel had left Southampton for a 10-day cruise in the Mediterranean ending in Rome. British Prime Minister David Cameron paid tribute, saying, "He could be Euro, and certainly was with May Euro, both a friend and a fearsome interviewer." Michael Grade commented, "He was kind of a television Renaissance man. He could put his hand to anything. He could turn over Richard Nixon or he could win the comedy prize at the Monterey Golden Rose Festival." On March 13, 2014, a service was held at Westminster Abbey, at which Frost was honoured with a memorial stone in Poets' Corner. Selected awards and honours: 1970, Officer of the Order of the British Empire, 1993, Knight Bachelor, 1994, Honorary Doctoral Degree of the University of Sussex, 2005, Fellowship of the British Academy of Film and Television Arts BAFTA, 2009, Honorary Doctor of Letters Degree of the University of Winchester, 2009, Lifetime Achievement Award at the Emmy Awards, Bibliography, Non-Fiction, How to Live Under Labour, or at least have as much chance as anyone else, To England with Love. With Anthony J. The Presidential Debate, 1968. David Frost talks with Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey. The Americans, Billy Graham talks with David Frost, Whitlam and Frost, the full text of their TV conversations plus exclusive new interviews. I gave them a sword behind the scenes of the Nixon interviews. Reissued as Frost-Nixon in 2007. David Frost's Book of Millionaires, Multimillionaires, and Really Rich People, The World's Shortest Books, an autobiography. Part 1, From Congregations to Audiences, with Michael Deakin and illustrated by Willie Rushton. One Could Have Kicked Myself, David Frost's book of the world's worst decisions, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? If You'll Believe That, with Michael Shear, The Mid-Atlantic Companion, or, How to Misunderstand Americans as Much as They Misunderstand Us, The Rich Tide, Men, Women, Ideas and Their Transatlantic Impact, References. External links, BBC News profile of David Frost, TV cream on David Frost, TV cream on Paradine Productions, David Frost at the Internet Movie Database, David Frost's appearance on This Is Your Life.